So good evening from Italy. Can you all see my screen?
Yes,
Can
fine.
you hear me well?
Yeah.
So thank you, Janine. It's such a great pleasure for me and such a great honor to meet you all, although just digitally. So from local deixis in Ladin to motion verbs in English, examples of cross-linguistic analysis informing L1 and L4 teaching practices. As the title indicates, the paper will address a number of themes, namely local deixis in Ladin, spoken as a first language, motion verbs in English, learned as a further language by Ladins, and awareness-raising teaching practices informed by cross-linguistic analysis, an example of which will be provided. The paper intends to illustrate how a series of studies on different semantic components of motion events finally led to the implementation of multilingual teaching units, which had the aim of drawing learners' explicit attention to motion event encoding in their first and other languages. To the research context, the analyses were carried out in multilingual South Tyrol, which is the most northerly Italian province. South Tyrol recognizes 3 official languages, namely German, Italian, and Ladin. The main focus of the research study was on speakers of Ladin, of Dolomitic Ladin, which belongs to the Rhetoromance group of languages. The paper adopts the term Ladin to refer to a sub-area of the broader Ladin or Rhetoromance region, which is therefore to be viewed as a simplification adopted for ease of reference. More precisely, the paper considers the Ladin variety spoken in the upper part of Val Badia, which is a valley located in the South Tyrolean Dolomites. Due to their geopolitical and geocultural context, Ladin speakers live in continuing contact with Italian and German, which they both learn from an early age. Speakers of Ladin usually learn English as a 4th language, which the younger generations officially take up in grade 4 of primary school. Children receive 2 hours of English tuition a week until grade 8, while the number of English hours normally slightly increases at upper secondary school. Ladin speakers provided data on their first and other languages. To the theoretical foundations, the investigations presented in this paper build upon a very large body of literature on both motion events and deixis. The paper can therefore inevitably only mention a very small number of publications and concepts that underpinned the whole research project. At the basis of deixis lay Bühler, Lyons, Levinson, Vanelli, and Diesel, who presented the basic concepts of dialectic center and place deixis, and provided overviews of forms, meanings, and uses of dialectic expressions from descriptive and cross-linguistic points of view. The analyses on motion events were initially inspired in particular by Tolmi, Slobin, Berman, and Slobin, Strömquist, and Verhoeven with their analysis of satellite-framed and verb-framed languages, in some cases using Mayer's picture book, Frog, Where Are You? Bertele explored typological issues in the domain of dialectology, considering the dimensions of orality and literacy in regional and standard languages, which was relevant to my research as well. By emphasizing the virtual lack of explicit teaching of motion verbs in class, Treffers, Daller, and Tidball provided a springboard for discussions about pedagogical implications of typological analysis of motion events. Filipovic also mentioned practical consequences of typological contrasts in her applied language typology approach. And finally, motion events fit well into the multilingual teaching framework, integrated linguistic education, Thomas and Le Pape Racine. So an overview of some research studies with their FOCI methods and results. The research focus lay initially on the dialectic locative system of Ladin spoken as a first language. The composite spatial dialectic system of Ladin had hitherto remained unexplored and undescribed. The research therefore aimed to document the different pragmatic uses of locative adverbs, to analyze them systematically, and to identify regular patterns of use. Data was firstly obtained using the deductive method of introspection and negative evidence, being myself a highly proficient speaker and daily user of Ladin. The data was then corroborated and supplemented by evidence that was provided in naturalistic settings by speakers of the language over many years. The online corpora, Trattamento Automatic de Linguaggio Ladin and Corpus Ladin Littéraire were also used. A few results. Like English, Ladin has a binary speaker-oriented locative adverbial system with kilo and dailo, here and there. Moreover, the Ladin spatial system has the two diametrically opposed particles of direction, ia and ka, towards there and towards here, which typically indicate motion away and towards the speaker on a level surface or in a real or imaginary straight line. Furthermore, the system includes an idiosyncratic set of adverbs that begin with ka, kura, and la, and are combined with the dimensions thither, up, down, inside, and outside, as shown in Table 1. Geographically speaking, ite and fora indicate a direction inside and outside of the valley following the river. Careful analysis revealed that the kura and la adverbs indicate locations viewed by the speaker as somehow distant. The ka adverbs refer to places considered by the speaker to be somehow proximal. With the exception of kaia, the ka adverbs can indicate locations that coincide with the speaker's position at the moment of utterance. The ka and kura adverbs can indicate discourse new locations and can therefore be accompanied by pointing gestures, while the la adverbs only indicate here are old locations and are therefore not used exophorically or gesturally. Territorial features play a major role in the directional adverbial system of Ladin, in which precise paths can be indicated with a combination of sometimes a high number of particles. As example 1 illustrates, Vima kiloka come here, hither, and up. The syntactic position of the adverbs is also significant. While 2 indicate the end position, 3 indicates the path. 2, vimoka kilo. 3, vima kiloka. Subsequently, the research focus shifted from a descriptive analysis of the adverbial path components in Ladin to a contrastive analysis of motion lexicalization patterns in texts compiled by speakers of Ladin in their first and other languages. So Ladin L1, Italian L2, German L3, and English L4. The texts were narratives prompted by an abridged version of Mayer's Frog, Where Are You? The analysis focused on the scene depicting the story frog escaping from its jar, which is given here as figure 1. The aim was to assess the level of similarity of description between the 4 learner languages. In order to avoid training effects, 4 different groups of speakers were asked to produce the text in one of their languages. As table 2 illustrates, the data set contained 42 Ladin texts, 22 Italian, 21 German, and 73 English texts. The subjects were between 12 and 13 years of age. They were proficient in Italian and German and at the beginner level of English. So despite the languages involved had a different status and the proficiency levels in them varied considerably, they were treated together in order to gain an overall picture of how speakers of Ladin would describe the specific story scene in their language repertoire. Some results, it can be seen in table 3 that the preferred lexicalization pattern was the one formed by a verbal and a nominal expression in all the languages considered. Their verbs were favored over adverbial constructions in the Italian texts, whereas the Ladin, German, and English texts had a higher percentage of verbs followed by adverbs. The preferred lexicalization patterns that were identified in the learner texts therefore complied with the typological characteristics of the target languages considered. Motion verbs were used most often in the English texts, followed by the Ladin ones. English L4 and Ladin L1 also had the lowest type token ratio, as illustrated in table 4. The highest type token ratio in German might be partly due to the high manner salience of this language. The low type token ratio in English can be explained by the learner's low proficiency in this language, whereas the Ladin ratio can be explained by the regional and primarily oral character of this language, which tends to make a wide use of a small repertoire of motion verbs, including the deictic verbs come and go. This is illustrated in table 5, which shows that come and go were used most often in the English L4 and Ladin L1 texts. The most frequent motion verbs were escape in Ladin and Italian and jump in German and English, namely champé in Ladin, scappare in Italian, hüpfen in German, and jump in English. The main lexical choices that were made suggest a lexical transfer from Ladin L1 into Italian L2 and from German L3 into English L4. Despite the wide use of champé and scappare in Ladin and Italian, the formally similar English verb escape didn't occur even once in the English texts, which might indicate that positive transfer is not as automatic as sometimes assumed. Overall, the analysis of preferred lexicalization patterns in the learner texts examined captured and confirmed a number of phenomena pertinent to linguistic typology and transfer. A further contrastive study concentrated on motion descriptions written in English by two groups of Ladin speakers who were at two different ages and proficiency levels. As shown in table 7, the investigation involved a total of 306 teenagers who were between 13, 14 and 17, 18 years of age and attended the lower and upper secondary school. The youngest participants were studying English for the 5th year and the oldest participants were in their 8th year of English. Mayer's book, Frog, Where Are You? Was again used to elicit the data from the participants who wrote a short narrative text. The analysis concentrated this time on the choices made by the learners in the verbalization of the story events of the story section represented in figure 2, which involves an owl swooping out of a tree hole, the story boy falling to the ground, and his dog running past, chased by a swarm of bees. The investigation intended to assess the level of similarity between the two age and proficiency levels in their choices of motion figures, motion verbs, and past particles. A few results. The most prominent figure in the story section examined turned out to be the dog, which was mentioned by the great majority of the younger participants and by all participants at upper secondary school, as illustrated in table 8. The motion verb tokens constituted around 10% of the total number of words at the lower school level and around 7% at the higher school level, as shown in table 9. This seems to suggest that lower level learners tend to concentrate on spatial trajectories more than learners at higher levels when they write narratives. Lower level learners limit their descriptions to the most salient and newest information in the images, which is typically the characters shift from one place to another. Both participant groups use the high frequency verbs run, fall, and come most often to describe the movements performed by the dog, the boy, and the owl. There was a difference between the two groups in the description of the bee event, which was verbalized by most of the younger learners with the verb fly and by the majority of the older participants with the chasing verb follow, as table 10 illustrates. A further analysis of the verbalization of the boy's fall showed that both proficiency groups mentioned the fall's source explicitly more often than the fall's destination. However, mentioning the source rather than the destination became increasingly important at the higher level, as table 11 shows. A variety of prepositions and adverbs collocated with the verb fly in the description of the bee event. As table 12 shows, behind was the most popular in the lower level texts. A non-target-like use of behind and after was found in several narrative sections at both school levels, as examples 4 to 7 illustrate. 4, the dog begin to run behind the trees and the bees run behind the dog. 5, the boy and the dog look after a tree. 6, after a tree, the boy saw his frog with one other frog. 7, they hid after a tree stump.
5 minutes to
Target-like.
go. 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you. A target-like use of behind and after is challenging for Ladin learners because of a lack of equivalence between English and the learner's other languages. German has both hinterherfliegen and nachfliegen. Italian dopo translates English after with a temporal meaning, while in other contexts, dietro can translate both behind and after. Ladin do translates both behind and after, and does therefore not require speakers to attend to the differences expressed by English behind and after. Overall, no striking differences were found between the two proficiency levels in the analysis of the use of motion verbs in the extracts considered, which leads us to teaching implications. Motion verbs were viewed as an ideal object of multilingual teaching with the potential to enhance cross-linguistic awareness among pupils and teachers in education, considering the different typological characteristics of the 4 languages learned by Ladins, the low manner saliency and the wide use of basic motion verbs in Ladin, and the learner's lack of familiarity with English manner of motion verbs. To cite one example, in addition to the study results presented before, a video description task revealed that none of 30 assessed university students at the B2 level of English were familiar with the verb hop in relation to humans or actively used the verb tiptoe. The first lesson was delivered in a multilingual and multimodal manner within the teaching framework integrated language teaching to 2 groups of 5th graders aged between 10 and 11. Given the wide breadth of the topic area, it was decided to focus on a restricted number of verbs such as walking, running, jumping, hopping, skipping, crawling, tiptoeing, galloping, and climbing. The lesson was introduced by 2 bilingual action songs that were also performed by the pupils. Afterwards, a number of total physical response activities followed. Then a series of video clips were shown to the pupils who orally described and discussed them in Ladin, Italian, and German, while the English expressions were practiced with the aid of various picture and expression cards. Afterwards, cards in different languages were assembled by the pupils who attached them to the wall and formed in this way a big table in the 4 languages and also in the 4 official language colors, which are green for Ladin, yellow for Italian, red for German, and blue for English. Paper fortune tellers were also used by learners to practice a number of English motion verbs in pairs. And finally, an adapted and targeted version of the story Yes We Can by McBratney and Fuge was told to the pupils. The primary school lesson was subsequently presented to future teachers at the Faculty of Education, who were, of course, also familiarized with a series of pedagogical concepts underpinning the activities and with Tolmy's typological framework for motion events. To conclude, so the overall aim of this paper was to provide a brief overview of some studies that were carried out on the system of deictic path components in Ladin L1 and on motion lexicalization patterns that were identified in a narrative texts produced by Ladins in their different languages and at 2 proficiency levels of English. The descriptive, cross-linguistic and typological studies that were conducted inspired multilingual teaching sessions at primary school and in teacher education. The progress pupils and students made in this respect could unfortunately not be systematically assessed, which is definitely a limit that the teaching program had. However, these targeted awareness raising activities in class gained approving reactions from children, students, and teachers, who were all actually very surprised at discovering a number of cross-linguistic issues in the field of deixis and motion events in their first as well as in their other languages. To conclude, a teacher's comment was in Ladin, "Kaž se sam spa plugonot," which is, we should do this more often. And keeping her word, she has very recently provided me with further food for thought, whose analysis is in progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martina. That was a lovely way to end the talk as well. And it's great to have a presentation on quadrilingual students. That's quite rare. So that's wonderful. Certainly in Europe, I think this is quite a rare combination to have to speak 4 languages. So let's see if there are any questions. In the chat, there are no questions at the moment yet. But please do keep your questions coming.
Yeah. There is one from Renan.
Okay. Not to me, then maybe it came to you, Freibert. Would you like to, Renan, would you like to unmute yourself? Let me see if I can find you and can, Renan.
Hey, hello, I can actually comment on that.
Yes, please.
No, I just wanted to make a comment that I found very interesting, that the learners apparently didn't seem to have displayed positive transfer between the 2 S-frames languages, German and English, in their English productions. It's only that.
Yes, and I thank you, and I can confirm this. This was just one example, but I also have other examples where a positive transfer that might have been seen as quite obvious did not take place. This is something which also surprised us. Gallop was another verb, for example, and a few others as well.
Maybe I can follow up from there. Where are you going from here? What is your next step in your research?
My next step is, until now, I've been working with texts, with written texts, based on static picture description tasks. So my next step is to work, instead of with static pictures, with videos. I've already made these videos and I've already collected the data. I've got around 100 responses so far from speakers of Ladin, speakers of Italian, and speakers of German in English. So my next step is going to be to analyze these videos to see whether there are differences between the static picture description tasks and the videos, and whether my conclusions as also made in other studies can be confirmed or not, or partly.
It seems to me quite difficult if you have Ladino as the outcome language to determine from which language any kind of transfer might come, right? That might be quite challenging to actually establish.
It is. I've not been able, for example, to find a clear Ladin influence on English yet. Yeah. When I compare Ladin groups with Italian and German groups, it's interesting that Ladins normally fall in between the German and the Italian groups. But it would be interesting to be able to find some influence from Ladin. I thought I might find something like this concerning the path particles, but this system is a characteristic feature of oral language. It is well alive and very common, but in oral language, in naturalistic settings, in specific settings, in specific contexts. So I've not been able yet, at least, to design experiments that would allow me to elicit this data in an experimental context.
And Eleni also has a question, so I'm just pressing a button to ask Eleni if she'd like to ask the question herself.
Hello, thank you very much. So I wanted to ask you if the texts in English, Italian, Latin, and German you analyzed were written by the same students or by different students, because I think that it would be also interested to see if there are differences in the text written by the same person. It was just an idea. Thank you.
Yes, this is something I thought about myself as well. I started in this way because also for practical reasons. And then on second thoughts, I would also have liked to have the same group writing the same text in 4 different languages. This didn't happen anymore, but this is definitely a good idea and something to keep in mind for the future. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. No, it's really, really, really interesting subject, and yeah, thank you.
Are there any further questions?